Hey, this is Brian Thompson, and welcome to the second part of our Canon C100 qualification course. Today I am going to walk you through the menu system and the heads-up display. The heads-up display is what you see on the screen when you turn on the camera. Let's take a look at what we've got here. So I've turned on the camera, and first thing you'll see up in the corner is a little battery icon, and that will give you a readout of how many minutes you've got remaining in your battery. Here I got, 91 minutes. Then you've got these, next to the triangles, you've got A and B. Those refer to your SD cards, okay? And so we have the A is in green, and it says 175 minutes. That means basically that the A card has been selected. That's the card that you're recording to, and there are 175 minutes remaining on the card. Right next to that, you're going to see where it says MP4, and that refers to the format and the codec that you are actually recording to. And I have to tell you, you do not want to be recording to MP4, you want to be recording to AVCHD. And the reason is that when you record to MP4, you actually are going to compress your audio, and you never want to compress your audio if you can avoid it. When you record to AVCHD, everything gets recorded in a format called linear PCM. When you record to AVCHD, your audio is not compressed. It's beautiful, perfect. So let's always record to AVCHD. I'm going to show you how to change that in just a couple seconds. So then up at the top where it says standby, that just means that you're not recording, you are standing by. When you do hit record, that will turn into a little red dot and you'll be recording. Next to that is the timecode display, and starting from that first number, the 13, that basically refers to the frame number. Then you get your seconds, then you get your minutes, then you get your days, and you can actually set this to whatever you want. It becomes really important when you're working on a multi-camera shoot. Looking down from the time code, though, we'll see some very important information, and this refers to also the codec and the format and the frame rate that you have selected. So there it says 24 megabits per second, and that refers to kind of the quality of the codec that you've chosen. And that really is what you should be shooting at. When you're shooting in either MP4 or AVCHD, both of those, the highest bit rate that you can record at is 24 megabits per second. If you want to record higher than that, you basically have to use an external recorder, and we don't have one, so there you go. The next is your frame resolution, okay? So in this case, we are shooting full HD, which means we are shooting 1920 pixels by 1080. The number below that refers to the frame rate, and this one is really important, okay? Really important to take a look at this when you are shooting. Here it's set to 25p, okay? 25 progressive frames per second. You always want to be set to 25p. Particularly here in Europe. The only reason to really be set to something else is if you're shooting slow motion, okay? And if you're shooting slow motion, you're going to shoot at 50p, so 50 progressive frames per second. If it says anything else, though, I can almost guarantee that you're going to find yourself in trouble down the line, okay? Because your main option here is something called 50i, and what that refers to is interlaced fields, okay? When you shoot 50i, what you're doing is every second you're basically creating half of the picture, sacrificing half of your resolution if you shoot interlace. Moving down, we've also got our audio channels are set up here, and you'll see that I'm basically recording channel 1 and channel 1, and that's because I'm recording everything from a single microphone. What you see right down there is basically your decibel readout, okay? So this is where you find out what your audio levels actually are, and right now my audio levels are coming in basically around -12 to minus 10 decibels, and that is just about exactly where I want it to be. At the end, you've got that the little red line. That little light is really going to light up if you go above 0 decibels, and that will mean that your audio has peaked. When your audio peaks, that's bad news because it introduces distortion into your signal, and basically there's very little. There you go. I just did it because I leaned in too close to the microphone. Well, I'll do that again. Check. Okay, you see how that lights up? That means that I have peaked. And if you're shooting some sort of narrative, short film, documentary, you really got to pay close attention to those peaks. If you get a lot of peaking, you should be adjusting your levels. Unfortunately, I gotta say, if you end up doing a take and your audio peaks, you can't really fix that in post. That is the kind of thing that you really gotta just do again. So suck it up and get ready to have another go. Moving clockwise, you will see where it says 1/50th of a second, okay? And that 1/50th of a second refers to your shutter speed. I gotta say, you generally speaking want to keep your shutter speed at 1/50th of a second when you are shooting 25p, okay, which is what we're doing right now. And you basically want to keep your shutter speed set to, there's a mathematical equation that you want to keep it set to. It is 1 over 2 times your frame rate, okay? And the reason that you want to do that is because it introduces a little bit of blur to your video. You might think that blur is a bad thing, but in fact what it does is it helps to maintain the illusion of movement when you play back your video, okay? Something that doesn't have motion blur begins to look really, really choppy. So if this was set to 1/100th of a second or 1/250th of a second, I can guarantee that it would be looking rather choppy and pretty bad. We don't want that to happen. Say, on the other hand, if we set this really low, if we set this to 1/25th of a second, what'll happen is you'll get so much blur that it's basically like watching somebody's POV drunk shot, okay? And you don't necessarily want that, okay? So let's just keep everything set to 1/50th of a second, and you should be in business. Next to that is your ISO. Okay, here we're set to an ISO of 1000, which is not really the greatest ISO to be shooting at. On the Canon C100, in fact, the best ISO to be shooting at is 850. 850 is known as the native ISO, and it is the ISO at which you have the greatest dynamic range available to you, and that's kind of the number of brightness levels between black and white. Okay, you get the most dynamic range when you are set to 850. You also get the least amount of noise and the most amount of detail. Okay, so that is what we should be set at, and you can actually adjust your ISO and your shutter speed by using the little joystick. And there are 2 joysticks on the C100. One of them is right on the monitor. The other one is right on the handle. And they both work exactly the same way, which is that you push it, okay? And you'll see that in this case, my white balance setting became orange, okay? And so if I push that and then I go either right or left, okay, I can highlight these other values and I can actually change them, okay? And so I could go from 1000 down to 850, and you'll see those brackets, okay? That's telling me that 850 is the native ISO for this. Now I could also, of course, go over to shutter speed, do the same thing, and as you can see, when you go a bit lower, it gets brighter, of course, but we really don't want to touch shutter speed. Shutter speed is not one of the settings that you want to mess around with when you are exposing your image, okay? So so there's your ISO setting, there's your shutter speed setting, and like we took a look right here, this is your white balance setting, okay? And you've got a couple presets here, like for daylight, This one is for tungsten lights, like you might find over at your grandmother's house. Here is one under K where you can actually adjust the precise color temperature. And so if we were outside, you know, when we have that little sunlight icon, what we're really telling the camera is we want to shoot at 5,600 degrees Kelvin. When we have the tungsten lighting, on the other hand, we are telling the camera to shoot at 3,200. You've also got an auto white balance setting, which is going to do its best to sort of guess at what the correct value is for the color temperature. Here it's pretty close. It's giving me a reading at 3,900 degrees Kelvin. Additionally, you also have custom white balance channels, and these, okay, are really the best way to go about setting your white balance. You set it to, let's say, A. You've got two channels. You've got your A channel, you've got your B channel. Let's do the B channel because that'll be very dramatic when we change it. All right, so the B channel right now is set for 5600K. But what I do when I want to do a custom white balance is I just take the camera, I point it. Oops, knocked over my. Sorry, everybody, knocked over my microphone. You point it. You point your camera at something that is white, like this wall here, and there is a little button, okay, that looks just like that symbol next to the B. There is a button, and you tap that button. The B flashes, and then it comes out, and here we have 3,900 degrees Kelvin. So that is the color temperature that it has decided should be in my office. The F number in the corner, okay, is your aperture setting. Okay, so the easiest way to change your aperture is by turning the wheel on the handle. Okay, and as you can see, I can turn it all the way down to f22, which is almost entirely black here, or I can open it up. On my lens goes to f4.0. Your 50 millimeter lens will go all the way open to f1.8, which is very, very bright. Your zoom lens has got a variable aperture. Okay, so that variable aperture means that when you're out at 18 millimeters, you will probably get 3.5. At around 100 millimeters, you're going to be getting a maximum f-stop of 5.6, which is, yeah, pretty dark, to be honest. But above the white balance in the aperture, you'll see the color profile and the color profile number. I strongly recommend not playing around with the custom picture settings. They can really throw you off if you don't know what you're doing. But that is kind of advanced. We're not going to talk about it right now. Above that, you'll see it says AF, and that means that we are in autofocus mode. And if we want to change autofocus to manual focus, we would actually do that on the lens. Okay, on the lens, there's a little switch, and you can change that AF to MF, and then you would adjust your focus by turning the ring on the lens rather than letting the camera choose in autofocus. Above that, there's actually a nice little readout that tells you what your focal length actually is. So here I'm shooting on a 24-105 right now, and let's take a look at my coffee pot here. So here I am at 24 millimeters, and I can zoom to 105. Well, that's not bad, not bad. That can be a big help during post-production, particularly if you're doing something like 3D work, or if you're adding objects to your scene. It's really helpful to know what focal length you were shooting at, so that you can kind of duplicate the lens in whatever 3D application you're using. Let's dig into the menu. There are a couple of things that you have to do in the menu, and let's take a look at what those are. Okay. So here is the main menu screen, okay, and as you can see, it's divided up into camera, audio, This is your video setup. This is the setup screen for the viewfinder and for the monitor. This is your timecode settings scene, and this is kind of the general settings scene. The general settings menu right down here. And this is where I want to start because it's got probably the most important command on the in the menu system, something that you should do the moment you get your camera, and that is to go into the menu. And you can scroll down, but you'll be scrolling for a long time. I kind of suggest scrolling up and going to initialize media, because this is how you format your card. Okay, so I'm going to go into initialize media, and I'm get the choice of SD card A or SD card B. You should be able to see, of course, which of the slots are being used up here on the heads-up display. So like we said, I'm using the SD card A. So I'm going to go ahead, push to the right on the SDA, and choose a complete initialization. Okay, it'll say it'll completely erase all the data from the SD card. May take a few minutes. Do you want to initialize? The answer is yes. So do OK, and it runs through the formatting. This is really important because one of the last things in the world you want is to bring back your card at the end of shooting and find everybody who was using the camera before you. You don't want to have to dig through their footage in order to find what you've been shooting. So, so please, first thing you do when you get the camera, always initialize your media, format that card, and make sure that you've got as much time as possible. And in fact, you'll see on this card there must have been about 2 minutes of video that had already been recorded, because I went from 175 to 177. Very exciting stuff. All right, so let's take a look here. Through here, there really aren't too many other functions that I want to talk about in the settings menu, but there is one that is very important. So like I said before, what we don't really want to be doing is recording to the MP4 format, because MP4 has compressed audio. What we really want to be doing is recording to AVCHD. And we can do that by going into where it says movie format and changing from MP4 to AVCHD. And of course the camera just cut out as I did that. Okay, so I've now changed it to AVCHD. Okay, so now that we're in the using the AVCHD movie format, we can go in and choose our AVCHD options. And so here we can choose our bitrate, okay? And so like I said, we have that 24 megabits per second, and LPCM refers to uncompressed audio, okay? So that is what we definitely want to be using. Now you will see that there is this option for 28 megabits per second LPCM as well, and I'm going to talk in just a second about why you might choose that. Okay, so we've got our bitrate set to 24. We go into our frame rate and we have PF25. That stands for progressive frame 25. And as you can see, using AVCHD, you can also choose 50i. You do not want to shoot 50i. Okay, you should always be shooting progressive. But let's see what happens if I change that bitrate. I'm going to change that to 28 megabits per second. Okay, we do have one or two other options to talk about, though, primarily up here under camera setup, and then also some of the audio settings. Here is where you can choose how you want the autofocus on the camera to work, okay, under AF in camera setup, okay. And right here you can see we've got two modes. We've got continuous and you've got one shot, okay. If you select continuous, then the camera is going to continuously attempt to focus on whatever it believes should be the subject of your shot. Sometimes this works a charm. I have to say, Canon's dual pixel autofocus probably the best in the business. That's coming from somebody who shoots Sony. I got to give it to Canon where it's due, though, and their dual pixel autofocus is pretty fantastic. If you are shooting, let's say, an interview, and you've got somebody who's very still, then I can almost guarantee that you're going to want to use something like one-shot autofocus instead, because when you set the camera to continuous autofocus, it does a lot of hunting, and it kind of goes in and out of focus, and there are micro adjustments that may or may not actually be reflecting what you want to be in focus. The ideal situation is to use manual focus. Sometimes that's not possible, and I, for one, very often I end up having to shoot videos that I'm shoot interviews, for instance, that I'm actually conducting, and so I can't be there just riding focus the entire time, and so it really helps to be able to have that autofocus. That, I would say, is kind of the order of preference. Ideally, manually focus. If not, I would try the single shot autofocus, and then if you are, particularly if you're on a gimbal or something, or you're shooting handheld, it's really only at that stage that you want to go in for the continuous autofocus. Okay, so back to that menu system. One thing that can be quite nice is changing your shutter speed, okay, from shutter speed to shutter angle. And when you set the shutter speed, okay, then yeah, you're shooting 25 frames per second, and you then set your shutter speed to 1/50th of a second. And then let's say you go ahead and you're shooting some slow motion at 50 frames per second, you got to make sure that you set your shutter speed to 1/100th, okay, of a second, because you always want to have 1/2 times the frame rate. Well, if instead of using shutter speed you use shutter angle, okay, I'm going to back out here, and what you'll see is that now instead of saying 1/50th, it says 180 degrees. And what that is going to do is basically automatically adjust your shutter speed to give you the correct shutter speed for whatever frame rate you're on. So now if I went from 25p to 50p, I wouldn't have to adjust my shutter speed. For the audio setup, you can have all sorts of choices about your audio input. So here, for instance, I could choose to be recording from the XLR plugs, either channel 1 or channel 1 and channel 2. Now, I'm only recording channel 1 because I only have one microphone. If I had a second microphone plugged in, I would want to record channel 1 and channel 2, and now my voice should probably have changed a little bit. So I'm going to go back to channel 1. And that way, like I said, I'm sort of duplicating the signal from the XLR microphone onto both channels. The best thing to do, of course, is to get online, get this qualification done, and take the camera out and go and shoot something. Okay, that is the best way to learn how to use this camera, how to get comfortable with it, and how to be able to work quickly and well.